Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final day of the Disruptive Innovation Festival, the online festival that asks the question, what if we can redesign everything? My name is Kinge, and I'll be your DIF host for today. And I'm pleased to welcome Daniel on our platform. And Daniel is a fellow of the Association of Professional Futurists with a digital consultancy background. In this session, we're going to find out all about automation, and we're going to get to know how it could be a threat or an opportunity for developing countries and the jobs of millions of people living there. Please remember, this is an interactive session, so post all your questions, your comments in the comment box below this video, or tweet using the hashtag ThinkDiff. That's all for me right now. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. So thank you for your time, and thank you everyone who's watching this live or recorded session. What I want to talk about today is really on the impact of automation on the developing world. A lot of emphasis has been done on talking about automation and the anxiety about jobs when it comes to Western countries or developed countries. What is more interesting, at least for me, and perhaps this is my bias of being based here in Indonesia, is how it impacts the rest of the world. And the rest of the world, unfortunately, is outside developing regions, developed regions or advanced countries. And that is really the question of how will these new technologies change countries that are still not only need to grow economically or in terms of prosperity and the human condition, but also are still growing quickly in terms of population. Countries like Indonesia, Nigeria, South Asia are still undergoing what's called demographic boom or the demographic dividend. So that's really what I want to get into today. So with that, I want to just start off with the presentation. So I want to go into it right here. Okay. And let's start. Oops. Oh, it's more tricky when you do it in live. Okay. So like I was saying, when it comes to the topic of automation, when it comes to
Sorry,
the topic...
Daniel, I'm going to interrupt here. We cannot see, your screen is totally black right now. So could you try to re-upload your slides? We can see them now. Oh, no, now we can see you.
Okay, let me see that.
Just give it another try and then we'll see if it works.
Maybe it just takes a while.
We can, if you can try to put them on your screen but not put it on a full screen, I think then it will work.
Okay, that's what I'm doing now.
No, it's still black.
Oh wow. Okay. Well,
you've did it before, just before the session. So I know you can do it.
We're just talking about that, weren't we? Do you see it at this point, or no?
No. Can you share your screen?
Yeah, I was. Share.
Yeah, I can see it now. If you keep it like this, I think will be good.
This is still okay?
No, no. Don't put it on full screen, just like this.
Oh, okay. Okay, strange. All right, so I'll just continue this way. So again, so when we talk about development, there has been massive amounts of development in Asia. We've seen it in Seoul and Korea, South Korea after the war. They went from absolutely being destroyed during the South Korean War, in the Korean Civil War, to Seoul being a technological powerhouse that is today, with Samsung and all these other technology companies. We see in Hong Kong, I was just there just yesterday, incredibly economically advanced city. There's a lot of issues, of course, but growth is possible for countries outside the West, outside the US. It's definitely there. However, all of these growth has been really copying the model that we've seen in the US, in Germany, and of course in the UK and throughout the West, which is export-based manufacturing-led growth. All that means is that we start working from the level of factory farmers to factory workers and eventually to office workers. Now, this work has been very brutal. I believe in India, the monthly salary for textile starts around 100 US a month. And in South Asia, they are total of 24 million workers working in these textile factories in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. It is not, of course, if you're thinking from a Western perspective, this is not the best kind of work. If you think historically, this is typically what has places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea have done to get to where they are today is through these very kind of brutal factory job conditions. But what it does also do on the positive side is also it's very easy to do, quote unquote, which is to take people from millions of people who work in the farms and bring them to the factories. And usually it doesn't require that much training. Usually if it's cheap enough, someone will want to build a factory in your country and export the goods to a richer nation. Now, we can talk about how this kind of work is inhumane, but the other fear that I have as someone from Indonesia is that word inhumane will go to non-human. And we're already seeing this in China, for example. The region of Guangdong wants to invest 154 billion US dollars over the next 10 years to switch from human factory workers to robot factory workers. Now, this won't kill all jobs, obviously, but in the case, for example, for automating the creation of printing fabric, there's already articles coming out and case studies that it's gone from 8 workers full-time to do X amount of work down to only 3 workers plus a robot. So that really changed the equation in terms of providing a path for development. It really changed the equation in terms of being able to bring people who are working in the farms to work in more, quote unquote, economically productive work in the factories in the cities. Now, even when we're not talking about automation, the world has been changing when it comes to industrialization. This is Danny and Roderick, who is one or two economists in the world who are talking about the issues of economic development in developing countries. And what he has seen through his analysis is that we've already seen that developing countries are facing bigger and bigger difficulties when it comes to industrialization. Trade policies make it more difficult. China, Taiwan, Korea, all these countries use a form of protectionism to build their home industry before opening up the market. That sort of path has been closed off because of free trade policies. A lot of the work now, even if it's factory work, requires very educated people or well-skilled people. And that's something that is difficult when you're, say, Indonesia or India, etc., to do this kind of work, to be educated enough to get these jobs. And of course, we also have the challenge of automation. Now, the bigger picture on this too is that even for countries that do see growth, who can get factory work or establish factories in their country, is that there's this decoupling between GDP growth and labor. Now, we're seeing it in South Asia, where more factory work, more economic growth is happening, but at the same time, the job growth isn't there. And I also, just 2 weeks ago, I did a paper with the Indonesian Statistical Bureau. And what we saw is that despite Indonesia booming economy for the past 10 years, where it's 5 to 3% growth, the number of unemployed youth has stayed stable around 20%, which is a very, very high number. So multiple factors mean that this traditional method of becoming well off in terms of overall human condition, in terms of economics, in terms of finance, is being taken away. And the big question for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people in developing countries, is the question of stability. For countries like Indonesia and elsewhere that are going through demographic boom, where a huge amount of the population is under 30 or under 20, if there's nothing to do, whether it's in terms of ways to get out of the house, move out of your parents' house to establish your own life. There's this whole lag. And before you think it, all you have to do is get a job. I mean, be educated and you can find a job. Well, that is going to be harder and harder because of these things that Denny Roderick talked about, which is trade policies, automation. Basically, it's a race to the bottom where there's just less and less jobs available, even though the GDP is going up and up. And the really stark example, the dark example, is what happened in Egypt. Now, it was part of a bigger Arab Spring revolution, but one of the big issues of Egypt was that for people under 35 who are educated, who had university degrees, their prospects of getting full-time work, formal jobs, and offices in government work just completely collapsed with the economy. So we have a lot of young people who don't know what to do. So when it comes to my issues, yes, there is a lot of issue in terms of sustainability. There's a lot of questions regarding whether we can go to circular economy or other things, but the big question is really taking care of the basics for me. Now, there's a lot of topics that's been discussed in terms of tackling this issue of technological unemployment or just lessening jobs because of the way the things are of inequality and the economic system. We've heard about basic income. There's 3D printing. There's decentralization. There is the commons economy. There's a lot of different concepts out there. However, in another way, these concepts are really just maybe part of the solution, but not the entire solution. So if you introduce basic income into Indonesia, for example, the big question for me is then not just how you can pay for it or how it will be funded, but what is the direction, what is the vision for that country? Is it supposed to just sustain everyone has a meal for tomorrow? Is it supposed to grow in a certain direction? Say, grow in terms of better healthcare, better education? Is it supposed to grow in terms of quality of life and also physical goods? So for example, in Indonesia, the past 5-10 years, the biggest change for me has been that everyone now has a motorcycle, and that's a huge deal. I know when you're in Europe, and I've been to Berlin and other places, the trend is everyone is moving towards bicycles or public transportation. So are the aspirations of Asians incorrect that they want to have the material wealth that Europe has? Will introducing basic income or a commons type economy address that? And even when you talk about 3D printing, how does that fit with the overall economy? Still the same questions. And still the question is, we have a huge growing young population. What is it that they should be doing? And what it really gets to is that the old thinking, the old classical model of capitalism, where you move from the farm to the factories, becoming industrial, a manufacturing-based economy, then slowly work your way up with better income, better education to a knowledge economy. So instead of now working in factories, people get to work in high-rise office spaces. That kind of linear style, while very simple and very seductive for governments because they don't have to do much, just create spaces for factories, make sure there's electricity, make sure there's a lot of workers. That kind of linear thinking is done with. There are still some countries that can do it. For example, Vietnam and Ethiopia, but the door is closing for majority of the countries and majority of the people. So we have to find a new model that doesn't depend on this linear relationship. That is going to be more complex, more organic. It will and that's the question that I want to posit is what comes after this when you're starting not at, say, the UK considering basic income or Finland considering basic income or say in Barcelona they're looking to P2P, peer-to-peer commons economy. But how does it work for developing countries that start at a lower economic base, a lower material goods base? And what should they aspire to? Is that a question? Now the opportunity here is that we can leapfrog away from the traditional development straight to new models. And what I mean by leapfrog is in Asia and in other regions, we've seen people move from not having a phone at home to having a smartphone, from not having a television or at least cable TV television to using YouTube. In Indonesia, a majority of people do not have bank accounts, but now for people who have smartphones in Indonesia, you can get an electronic bank account, which is not run by a bank, but run by e-commerce companies or other type of non-financial institutions that lets you send money to your friends, pay for goods, just like if you had a bank account. But it's actually a lot easier because it's easier to transfers. It's easy to access your money 24 hours a day, which is even better than the banking system. Now, while we have these opportunities, there's still quite a bit of a challenge on this. For when you talk about textile manufacturing, that's 24 million jobs that could go away or need to transform. But the good news when we think about this is really moving away. We're already starting to move away from this economic GDP focused way of thinking. The easiest example that we have of that is when we talk about the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals. Right. Now, when you talk to your local politician or it's during election cycle, people talk about jobs, people talk about growth. But on the other hand, there is a larger movement that talks about more basic level things that will build up to prosperity. So whether it's reducing hunger or eliminating hunger, making sure there's equality, gender equality, racial, ethnic equality. Making sure there's basic infrastructure for logistics or otherwise, environmental policy. So there is a movement from already more holistic thinking in terms of prosperity, in terms of growth. And I think that's something that developing countries need to refocus on and embrace more. But at the same time, like I said, you still have that problem of what to do with this growing number of youth and population. What are they to do? Now, there's a couple ways to look at this. One is a common model that I think quite a few people may know, which is in Bhutan, they have what they call the gross national happiness. So similar to the Sustainable Development Goals, instead of focusing on raw financial numbers or economic growth, the question is about education. The question is about living standards. The question is about how integrated is the community? How active is the community? And what can we do about it? How can we protect our culture or promote our culture or grow our culture? And that's one way of looking at how we organize society, right? We organizing around a kind of agreed upon terms of what happiness or what prosperity is. We can also organize our society in a more entrepreneurship focused way. And this is something that I've seen in the Philippines and also in Indonesia. Now, in the Philippines, there's this past few years, there's this push for something called the Negocio Act, which is basically their plan is to create small business centers throughout the Philippines, one in each major city, where you can register for your business. They connect you with suppliers, customers, partners, help you find financing, have mentorship, etc. So basically, think about it as a government intervention to promote small businesses. The whole focus on this is for job creation, because small businesses actually do create more jobs than, say, bigger companies. It's that increased efficiency in large companies that actually hinder growth. So promoting small businesses are the best way to provide jobs and a means of living for young people and for society at large. In Indonesia,
can I jump in on this? I'm wondering, how does automation come into the play with this entrepreneurship economy?
So that's a very good question, and I want to talk about it more on the Indonesian example. So Indonesia has the same kind of questions. I've seen a talk by the Ministry of Trade, and he was saying, we're putting a lot of focus on trying to have have Chinese companies build their smartphone factories here in Indonesia. Well, that's fantastic, but in 10 years, those factories will be automated, and what's the point of providing all these tax incentives for no jobs? Now, what is Indonesia trying to do now then, in turn, is, okay, there is automation that's coming and automation that's already here. But there's some forms of automation, not the robot kind necessarily or what we think in the future, but present automation that they can actually build small businesses, right? So this is where you go back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of 3D printing or decentralization. Or one example is Indonesia has been really pushing hard on this concept of agri-tech, so agricultural technology, not in terms of robots working the fields, but making it a lot easier for farmers to sell directly to the city. In Indonesia, it's usually a large network going from one middleman to another middleman. So the farmers actually don't see a lot of the money that cities pay for when it comes to food. So there are companies like Tani Hub. There's a startup called Sikumis, and there's a bunch of startups that basically say, how can we build a logistical network to sell directly, and people can buy and sell very easily just on their smartphone? Because if you're ever in Indonesia, everyone has at least 2 smartphones and a battery pack. That's like standard, not 1 smartphone, but 2. And in Indonesia, you can buy a smartphone for around $40-50 US. It's not going to be as cool as an iPhone, but it does basically the same things. So there is a look at using logistical technology, communication technology, and that is a form of automation to help businesses grow or to create new businesses. A little further ahead, there are work by some Chinese companies one is called JD, and what they want to do is look into the use of drones to actually integrate rural economy with the city economy. So instead of having the trouble of building roads, building logistical networks, can we just have like a fleet of drones carry packages from rural areas? So for craft goods or small type of manufacturing centers, and just send them over a mountain using a drone into the city center. So this is a way of using automation in a focus to create jobs. And what I like about this is usually when people talk about automation, they talk about efficiency and scale. How can I use this one robot to do the things that 100 people can do? Instead, the thinking is, how can we use automation and new communication, new technologies to decrease inefficiencies for small businesses? And that's a very different question, right? Instead of saying, I want Watson so I can fire all my radiologists or whoever lawyers and just use Watson to handle things for me, like certain AI technologies. This one is saying, look, we don't have the best roads. There's no communication or there's no coordination right now between the cities and rural areas. How do we bring people together? So that is a type of automation that countries like Indonesia at least want to look at and are trying to do to make people closer together. And I think that's a very different way of looking at automation compared to what you traditionally hear when it comes from Western countries, or even just the current discussion about automation. Does that address your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. So just kind of closing up for this is, right now when we talk about the future, there are many different possibilities still. And yes, one of the possible way is that technological automation combined with globalization and free trade, et cetera, are killing jobs and will continue to kill jobs. But another way to look at it is what are potential preferred futures we can work towards. Can we flip the idea of technology from being, like I said, increasing scale without human involvement to actually bringing people together in terms of entrepreneurship or other means? Can we flip the script around and instead of worrying about GDP growth, economic growth, can we instead talk about how do we make our community stronger? How can we make our country better in a sustainable way, and in a very kind of human focused kind of way, quality of life. Now there are different trade-offs between this, and I'm just going to be extreme for the sake of thinking. Is if you go towards, say, a future of gross national happiness, are we then denying people from having quote unquote more material goods? Maybe because the living qualities, I'll say, living standard of someone in Bali is definitely very different from someone in Europe. Does someone have a right? It's like, yeah, that's great that we have free schools, decent hospitals, etc. But I want to live like someone does in Berlin. I want to live like someone does in London. Does gross national happiness get them there? And if not, what kind of discussion do we need to take place to say, you know what, we're not going to ever be as prosperous in a material sense as these countries, but we'll be prosperous in our own way. Then when it comes to entrepreneurship society, where did we draw the line between everyone has a small business and we're all part of this kind of community buying and selling for each other, to the extreme end, which is we promote consumerist culture, right? So that is something that we still have to even think about and negotiate, is what is the economy for? What is our aspiration as a country? Like, who do you want to be when we grow up? Do we want to be like Europe or Germany or the US? Do we want to be like California, or are we going to find our own path? Does the future mean we have skyscrapers that rival those of Hong Kong, or we remain a small village but a happy small village? And those are the real kind of deep discussions that need to take place, because the default government push that most countries in developing countries push, which is industrialization, just simply does not work anymore. So even if countries wanted to have more factory jobs, that default future doesn't exist anymore. So we need to think about what is our preferred future, where we want to go. And I think that is like the big interesting question for me in terms of thinking differently, is having a new vision of what it means to, what do you aspire to, and what it means to be prosperous. And that is, that's my talk.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. I think you fired a lot of interesting questions to us where we can think about. And I think it's time for us to fire some questions at you now. Okay. We've already had 2 questions coming in via the website. And for everybody watching, please post all your questions, comments in the discussion box below this video. If you're watching this back on demand, please still post your questions. We'll ask Daniel to take a look at it now and then. So we have a question coming in from Therese. She says, "Hi Daniel, thanks for your thoughts, very inspiring. Are there certain demographic factors that work well for adoption of automation in South Asia?"
That's a very good question. And right now that is the main fear, that these forces are counter to each other. So the discussions I've seen are either don't worry about it, we'll find something for these people to do, or worry about it because what are these people going to do? So
sorry, can you explain a bit about the worries that you mentioned?
So the worry is that before we get to a period of economic development, that we can start looking at, say, like a more a substantially sustainable, like a welfare-based society, like what you see in Europe, is that we won't be developed enough to do that because there is no economic growth. But like I said, the counter example for that is what Indonesia is trying to do, which is, okay, we have automation. How can we do it to create jobs instead of eliminate? Let's not talk about how efficient automation is. Let's talk about how it can help bring people together. So that's the question really, and there are people trying to answer it, but I don't have an answer of how automation works perfectly with demographic increasing population size. Only is how can we create jobs despite these 2 factors.
All right, that's interesting. So let's go to the next question. Elisa asked a question. Can we learn from the EU or Americas, or is the context in South Asia so different that we shouldn't benchmark and build something completely new?
I think the context is very different, and we don't have to go as far back in time, which for me, I think Europe and US growth was further back in time. We can just look in Hong Kong or Singapore or China, for that matter. In terms of, could there be another China in that took the exact same path? No. Even for India right now, that path is closed, and the same for Indonesia. There is basically no need to take millions of people from the farmland, move them to the factories. And now it's difficult because free trade is so strong that they cannot have a protectionist measures. So if you look at the history of China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, they actually did not have a free trade economy. They protected their economy from trade while exporting to US and Europe. Now that's changed because of legal reason, and that's also changed because of behavior, which is people are simply buying less. And we also now have increased competition. A lot of countries are still are trying to be the last. So we have now Vietnam and Ethiopia right now being potentially the last countries that can develop based on a manufacturing model.
All right, so I think we're running out of time, and I want to wrap it up with a question that you've come up with, and that is automation going to be a threat or an opportunity for the developing countries?
Well, that's what I really want to explore. It's not set in stone, and that's why I had that chart of the different possible futures. If we maintain the same thinking, as long as somehow we can get factory jobs, we can industrialize and we'll be okay. If governments and people maintain that thinking, then that is definitely a threat. If we say we don't mind automation because we're focused on happiness, then that's even better, because now you can still have factories without any people. It's not a problem. Maybe because they're building things that are subsidized or low cost that people can use, right? Not for export, just for local use. Or you can go Indonesia route, which is, can we use automation to help small businesses to bring people closer together from rural urban areas? So it just comes to the question of what we want to do with it, and we have to do it with intent. We can no longer use default. What people did 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We now actually have to actively participate and understand what is the future we want and how do we get there.
So if I can summarize this, it can be a threat or it can be an opportunity, but it really is up to us to make it into an opportunity if we have the good mindset for it. Is that right?
Right. Right.
All right. Thanks a lot, Daniel. That's it for now. I want to thank you for your amazing talk that you've just done. It was really inspiring for all of us, I think. And for everybody watching online, thanks a lot. Thanks for your questions and keep them coming. And we are on our last day of the DIF, which means it's time for a grand finale at 5 p.m. GMT. We're going to reflect on the sessions that we had. We're going to play some games around it. So watch at 5 p.m. And if you've missed out on any of the sessions, don't worry. All the sessions are recorded and we have them on DIF on demand. Just simply go to our website. We also have made some playlists for you to navigate through the amounts of sessions. For example, we have a playlist of videos that are shorter than 10 minutes, or a playlist for designers, what sessions to watch. So have a look there. And that's it for now. Thanks a lot, Daniel, and see you at another session.
All right, bye.